Let's talk.
Charles Brown.
Unsinkable Lights, Charles H. Lightoller's epic tale of hope and survival from the sinking of the Titanic to the heroic rescue in Dunkirk. Charles H. Lightoller's life was anything but ordinary. It has been immortalized in a new book by Dustin D. Hyland. I'm delighted to say that Dustin joins me live on the line now. Dustin, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
The pleasure's all mine. I kind of know a little bit about this man, but it's one of the situations where you scratch the surface and it is absolutely outstanding. And you could, as the saying goes, you couldn't make this stuff up, could you, Dustin? Just explain a little bit about who Charles was, where he was born, etc.
It really is a story, for Hollywood that would make a great movie or a miniseries, lots of action. So Charles H. Lightoller, he was a British sailor. He was born in 1874 in Chorley, England. Unfortunately, his mother passed away a month after he was born. His dad kind of abandoned him and his siblings and moved to New Zealand shortly after, when he was a teenager. And at the age of 13, he decided to get a job at the Liverpool docks, and shortly after went to sea on a sailing ship. And his life was just kind of filled with adventure. His second ship, the Holt Hill, ran aground. That was his first of his 4 shipwrecks in life. You mentioned Titanic. That's his most famous, but that was his second shipwreck.
Right.
But his first shipwreck was the Holt Hill, ran aground on St. Paul Island in the middle of the Indian Ocean. Him and about 40 others were marooned on that island for about 8 days before they were rescued. Went through, subsequent sailing ships, eventually moved to steam. And then in January of 1900, he joined the White Star Line, the famed White Star Line, and he got in a little trouble to start. His career almost ended there with the company. October of 1900, he was in Sydney, Australia. There's a fort there, Fort Denison, and it was a disused fort. And Lightoller was a bit of a prankster, so he decided, him and 2 midshipmen decided one night to row out to this fort and use one of the ship's guns, one of the cannons, and fire it at about 1 o'clock in the morning. It blew out a whole bunch of lights in Sydney. And by the time the ship got back to Liverpool, they had figured out who was the culprit, and he kind of got called out, but was allowed to stay with the company and kind of slowly rose through the company. And
that's the kind of thing you do, isn't it? You and a couple of mates. Come on, you're a young man in your late teens, early 20s. Who hasn't gone out and let off an arm across the bay at one of the major capitals? One of the things just blew my mind, like Dustin. He begins in the age of sail. He's actually working under sail. I mean, that's incredible, isn't it?
He does, and he came about right at that kind of transition time. There was a lot of sailing ships, a lot of steamships, but almost everybody at that time kind of got their start in sail, learned the basics of seamanship and stuff like that. And then, as the Industrial Revolution really took hold on land, it also did at sea, and steamships.
So he's literally learned the ropes. So many naval terms, so many sort of British terms in our language have come, learning the ropes, etc., have come from that. And it's just really interesting that as a young man is maybe abandoned. He ends up in the Merchant Navy, and that presumably gives him a family. It gives him a crew, a purpose, rather than sort of drifting around Liverpool or around the sort of the northwest of the UK.
Absolutely, yeah. He fell in and had a seagoing family, as you say, and eventually switched to steam and the White Star Line, and was after the initial incident in Sydney was very successful and kind of slowly moved up the ranks of the steamship. The officers of the White Star Line. So
we come to the one, and you say that he can make a Hollywood movie. Well, he kind of appears in 2, doesn't he? He appears in Dunkirk, Hollywood movie, and he appears in that small movie that people may have heard of, a couple of unknowns, Leonardo DiCaprio, etc. Titanic. So how does he, quote unquote, as we say these days, how does he get this gig, Dustin?
So, he was moving up through the company, and originally he was assigned as the first officer on Titanic, which would be the third in charge. You had the captain, the chief officer, and the first officer. So he was a fairly senior officer at that point. And it was just, it was the newest and latest ship from the White Star Line. At the time, today we look back at Titanic as this revolutionary ship. It really, at the time, until its sinking in April of 1912, was just another ship by the White Star Line. It was the newest ship, slightly bigger in displacement than its sister, the Olympic, but it was just the next ship in line, and he got selected for it. I mean, at this point, he was probably only a couple of years away from getting command of his own ship, but he was selected. There was a little shuffle the day before the ship left. On April 10th, 1912, from Southampton, they brought in a new chief officer. So the chief officer, Murdoch, slid down to the first officer. Lightoller slid from first officer to second officer. So the Titanic leaves April 10th, 1912, on its maiden voyage. Goes to Cherbourg, France, and Queenstown, Ireland. And unfortunately, on the night of April 14th, 1912, at 11:40 p.m., it ran into an iceberg, obviously, famously, and sank within 2 hours and 40 minutes.
So, because it must be very difficult to write about Titanic, because obviously it is. You say to people, name a ship, and they're going to, name three famous ships, and they'll go, Mary Celeste, Titanic, and another, the Queen Mary or something, the Queen Elizabeth II, if you're a Brit. So because it's must be very difficult to write his story without the background music, going, and then they got into Titanic, da da da, because it's for him, it's like, I've been bounced down one, I'll sort it out when I go over to New York or wherever they're going to do wherever they're staying in Newfoundland or whatever. I mean, does he write back to anybody? Do you know what his feelings are on the journey before the rendezvous with the ice pack?
So he did write some letters to his wife. He did write a memoir in 1935. Wrote a memoirs. He did grant some interviews afterward and wrote about his experience and stuff. So there is some writing, and he was. I think he was excited about being on Titanic. He really had a love for one of his previous ships, the Oceanic, which ended up being his third shipwreck later on, but getting ahead of myself. But I think he was excited about it, a little overwhelmed by kind of the sheer size of it. He mentions in his memoirs that it took him 14 days to kind of figure out his way around this thing, because it was a very large ship, especially compared to contemporary vessels.
And of course, you see, we're now in the 21st century, over 100 years later, and we don't kind of get how high-tech Titanic was. I mean, because we leap on airliners and go across the Atlantic, in a couple of hours, and it's like, yeah, fine, no problem. This is state-of-the-art. It is one of the White Star Line is, if you like, one of the most famous companies in the world. The industry leaders, stock exchange, 100 companies are on this thing, the glamorous are there. And so therefore, the shock that goes in when this ship obviously sinks does reverberate around the world in a way that no other shipwreck or ship disaster has kind of happened before.
Absolutely. It was the largest shipwreck in the world, not only the size of the ship, but the scale of the death toll. And then kind of made that much worse that it was its maiden voyage. The ship never got the career of, some of the other ships, the Mauritania, some of its peers, Mauritania, the Olympic, some of these other ships, it sank within 100 hours of leaving on its maiden voyage.
And presumably he's one of the highest officers to actually survive this, because, everybody's supposed to go, everybody being very British and the Empire is supposed to go down with their ship, dear boy. So, how does he get off the ship when obviously it's complete chaos? It's dark, it's freezing, there's people running in all directions, the band is playing on apparently. So how does he get off the ship and survive?
So he was the senior surviving crew member on Titanic. So he was, as I mentioned, he would have been the highest ranking officer by the time the ship left. He was actually on watch until about an hour on watch on the bridge. He was the one in charge of the bridge until about an hour before the ship hit the iceberg. At the time of the collision, he had just gone to his cabin and he was just laying down to go to sleep when the ship hit. Initially, he didn't think it was much of a big deal, a little shudder.
Yeah.
The impact was felt differently depending on where you're at on the ship. But the general consensus was it really wasn't much damage, initially. So he went out on deck. His station in an emergency was on the port side, which would be the left side of the ship. And his job was to launch these lifeboats. And you mentioned James Cameron's little film, 1997 film Titanic, kind of an indie film, I think.
Yeah, there's low budget numbers. Yeah,
Yeah, didn't get a lot
Sank
of...
Without Trace, Tish Boom, here all week. Thank you. Yeah.
I didn't get a lot of press. I mean, largely forgotten, I think, at this point. But they show him in the movie, and he was in charge of launching the lifeboats on the port side. He did have some assistance. There's some controversy because he did launch a lot of lifeboats half filled, as the starboard side did as well.
Yeah.
But as the ship was about to sink or going down in kind of its last moments, he was on top of the officers' quarters, kind of near the bridge, pushing off the last lifeboat. It was a collapsible lifeboat. It was stored up on top of the officers' quarters. So there was no time to launch it. So him and a couple others essentially just shoved this boat off the ship.
Yeah.
And he knew it was going down. Obviously, as we had talked about, he had already survived one shipwreck in his life. So he decided he was just going to jump overboard. He jumped kind of over the front of the ship, and he was going to swim toward the crow's nest. As he's swimming away, he realized, boy, this is kind of a dumb decision. The ship's going down. Why am I swimming here? So he starts swimming away. He gets sucked into one of the grates of the ship.
Whoa.
Kind of underwater, kind of kicks loose, gets sucked down again, kicks loose, and as he's swimming kind of frantically away from the ship, he swims to this overturned lifeboat, the collapsible lifeboat that he had just pushed off the ship, and grabs onto a rope kind of attached to this boat. At the same time, if you do remember the film, the 97 film, the forward exhaust stack, the forward exhaust funnel number one, breaks off as the ship is kind of going down and falls into the water, crushes a lot of people, kills a lot of people. It missed him by a few feet.
Wow.
And kind of pushed him and this lifeboat away from the Titanic, away from the suction and everything.
Yeah, I was going to say, right. I mean, we've only got 18 minutes, so I don't know if that might sound a long time, but blimey, this guy's got so much. So he survives. Then is it First World War breaks out, or does he get shipwrecked before I get one more time just for good luck before the fourth time?
He gets shipwrecked less than a month into the war. After Titanic, he goes back obviously to the White Star Line after all the British and the American inquiries and everything. And then shortly before the war breaks out, he's back on the Oceanic, which is, again, his favorite ship.
Yeah.
And then in August of 1914, when the war breaks out, that ship becomes the HMS, Oceanic.
Right.
And it's up on northern England, and it runs aground, and that ship also sinks 28 days into its military career.
Yep.
Shortly afterward, he commands a couple other, he is stationed on a couple other British warships during the war, an aircraft carrier, an airplane.
So he goes to the British Navy. He doesn't carry on as a merchant marine. Then he transfers to the British Navy. Yeah.
He was most of the officers of the major shipping lines. The requirement was that they were also members of the Royal Navy Reserve. So when the war breaks out, when the Great War breaks out, they get called up. So he goes through a couple other ships, including a little mission as a spy mission down in the Channel. And eventually he ends up in command of the HMS Falcon, which was a destroyer, a small, older destroyer, kind of an aging destroyer. As a reserve officer, they weren't given, the newest, the latest and greatest ships. And then on March 30th, 1918, the ship was escorting a convoy duty off the eastern coast of up in the North Sea. And he was not up on the bridge at the moment. He was down in the wardroom. But essentially, the ship cut in front of another ship and got its bow clipped off. And everybody got evacuated. There was one death down in the engine room, but everybody got evacuated. And it's kind of a funny story. He's sitting there, very British, drinking tea, listening to music with the two other senior officers on board while the ship slowly sinks. By the time it sank, it was another cold April night, 6 years almost to the day that Titanic sank. And then, eventually they jump into the water, they get rescued, and he gets, after a short court martial, he's found not guilty, and he gets command of his final ship, the USS Gary, which is another destroyer. He didn't let that one sink, but he did use that in July of 1918 to ram a German U-boat and sink a German U-boat. It was one of the last German U-boats sunk during the war. I
suppose the thing is, the plus side is, this is your fourth sinking, and B, you're in convoy, so you're not going to be either freezing to death in the North Atlantic or stuck on an island as you were the first time around, where, hey, spoiler alert, children, there's no GPS, you can't just go on WhatsApp, so it could be months before you're found. So you would have thought that would have been a book in itself, Dustin. But of course, he's got as an old sea dog, etc. He's still got links to the sea. So presumably as we rumble towards the Second World War, what is he up to? Is he still serving in? Is he working in the? Is he still back? Is he back on the liners? Is he sort of semi-retired? What's his situation? Say sort of 1938, 39 as war starts to break out in Europe.
So after World War I, he returned, gets demobilized. He goes back to the White Star Line shortly after. He actually quits the White Star Line in February of 1920. He had about 20 years in at that point. After commanding all these ships and stuff like that, it was very unlikely that he was ever going to he was kind of blacklisted because of Titanic. Most of the officers were. And it looked like he was never going to get command of his own ship. So he leaves the White Star Line. He does a lot of different jobs in the interwar years. He writes his memoirs, as I mentioned. He writes for a couple other publications. He raises chickens. He plans treasure hunts. He races motorboats. He tries to start a new shipping line that quickly failed. Just a lot of different activities. By the time the Second World War rolls around, he was in his mid-60s. Yeah. A little older gentleman, and then what happened was you're referring to Dunkirk.
I'm just thinking he's sitting there. He's in his 60s. He's got himself a little boat called Sundowner. Great name. We can all, you can almost feel the Jimmy Buffett song, can't you? You can almost feel it. Maybe not a margarita, but something to do with rum, I would imagine. And you think, okay, that's I've had quite an interesting time. I'm just going to sit here on the south coast. Presumably he's in some little port town around there, Dustin, on the south coast, looking to while away his retirement. But then comes second Hollywood film, Dunkirk.
Absolutely. Yeah. So he, as you mentioned, he got this 58-foot boat and turned it into this luxury motor yacht called the Sundowner. And him and his wife and his family would go out and take trips around in the Channel, around Europe in this boat and just sail. He never lost the love of the sea. And then Dunkirk comes, and it's not going well for the British and French troops.
That's the understatement of the week, Dustin. Thank you so much.
It is. They're on their heels, and they're trying to get back to these different French ports. By the time they get there, the only port that's available to evacuate from is Dunkirk, and the Royal Navy needed ships to get these troops out of there, these soldiers out of there. And they went looking for ships, and these two officers came to him in late May of 1940 and asked him, hey, they said, we need to borrow your boat to go rescue these troops. His own son, Trevor, was actually one of those troops. He didn't know exactly where his son was at, but he was a major or captain, I think, at the time. And Lightoller told those officers, he said, if anybody's going to go there, it's going to be me and my son. His oldest son, Roger, was later joined the Royal Navy Reserve as well. And they had this 18-year-old Sea Scout that was kind of milling around the area, and they recruited him as well. So the three of them, this 18-year-old Sea Scout, his 30-some-year-old son Roger, and the mid-60s Lightoller, they arrive at Ramsgate in the early morning of June 1st, 1940. He gets his marching orders, and they start off to do Dunkirk. They're avoiding sea mines, or they stop and rescue this other boat that's on its way back to England from Dunkirk that's on fire, and they rescue 5 people off of that boat, get away just as it blows up. And then as they're getting closer to Dunkirk, the Germans find them, and they're dropping bombs on this boat. They're shooting at it, and it's a very nimble vessel. And it's Trevor, his son Trevor's at the wheel. Lightoller's kind of up on the bow, kind of guiding Lightoller, guiding his son, telling him when to make a quick turn to port or starboard. And they get to Dunkirk, and everything. They got there just fine.
Presumably because obviously it's a pleasure craft. It can get closer into the troops than the big destroyer. So they're not going to load up with and come straight back. Are they going to be ferrying people who sort of waded out or swum out to the closer they get to sundown? Because that's the thing of the small boats, isn't it? They're not going to take them all the way back. They're going to ferry them to hopefully a bigger craft.
Yeah, so at this point in the evacuation, they were using the piers, the moles, to kind of get troops off. The larger Navy ships were running troops back to Portsmouth, and the smaller boats were going to Ramsgate, and so he pulls up alongside a Royal Navy destroyer. And at one point during one of his European adventures, he had 21 people on this boat, which I've been on the boat before. It's being restored right now. And it's a very, I don't think people realize how small a 58-foot boat is.
Yeah.
He had 21 people on this boat before, which is a feat in itself. So he pulls alongside this Royal Navy destroyer. The captain of this destroyer is like, well, how many people can you take on board? And he says, I can get 100 on this. Right?
That's the spirit, sir. Right.
He's going to get as many people off of there as he can. Yeah. And, the captain kind of looks at him, kind of in disbelief, but he starts loading them up, and he gets 75 down below decks. He's having everybody lay down kind of on top of each other. They're all getting jammed in there.
Wow.
He gets another almost 50 up above. So by the time they left Dunkirk, they had 130 people on this boat, built for much.
How low in the water was it then at this point? I mean, presumably, the weather thankfully the weather was relatively good, because otherwise a decent swell could have been a disaster for everybody. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, the boat was barely afloat, only a couple inches above the gunwale, and they start on their way back to Ramsgate. Again, they're being shot at, bombs dropped on them, and they kind of avoid all that. And then as they get closer to Ramsgate, some of these other ships that are going by back and forth, the bigger ships, the Royal Navy ships, are causing, in their wake, they're causing these swells. And he basically has to tell people to lean one way to port or starboard, kind of to counter these swells. Eventually gets back to Ramsgate, and the port or the harbor patrol is like, hey, just hang out there for a while. He's like, I got 130 people on this thing. They tell him to pull into port. He does. Kind of the chief petty officer, the Royal Navy chief petty officer that's there, just is astounded, just can't believe that they got this many people on such a little boat.
You see, Dustin, we're probably the same age, but you see, when I was a kid in the 70s in Great Britain, we used to have this thing about how many people you could fit in a mini, an old mini, not one of yours. And I think the record was, I don't know, not personally, I think it was something ridiculous like 30 or 27 or something. This absolutely blows it out, pardon the pun, blows it out of the water, doesn't it? Because that's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's just a crazy number. Like I said, I was on board a couple of years ago, and just once you look at the boat, especially 58 feet, and you wonder where they put everybody. But yeah, he got back. There was a lot of soldiers that didn't do well with the sea. A lot of sea. So him and his son and this Sea Scout, they clean up the boat, and they get ready to take it back again. Unfortunately, by that point in the evacuation, the Royal Navy had determined, hey, you're unarmed, you're too slow, we're not sending you back. So that was its one and only run in the Dunkirk evacuation.
What happens? I mean, obviously, hopefully he lived because he's in his 60s there. He lived into the 50s, the 60s to a ripe old age?
He lived to 1952.
Right.
So during the rest of the war, he actually, he was too old to serve in the Royal Navy. His son Trevor, his son Trevor continued in the Army.
Yeah.
He had another son, his youngest son, Brian, served in the Royal Air Force, but unfortunately died in the first day of the war on the very first raid of the war, got shot down. And then his oldest son, Roger, the one that went with him to Dunkirk, got killed in the last month of the war in France in the raid at Granville. But Lightoller himself, he worked for the Home Guard, and he moved ships around England. Still did his part to support the war.
Yeah, because coal is a thing they're having to get coal from the northeast of them. The Second World War, as a lot of it is about shipping, Dustin, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So he was still active. I mean, well into his 60s, moving these ships around and supporting the war effort. After the war, he kind of settled into, for him, maybe a little bit of a leisurely endeavor. He opened a little shipyard with his remaining son.
Yeah.
Still used the Sundowner. The Sundowner was actually taken from him by the Royal Navy and used during the war. And then after the war was returned to him, he kind of got it fixed back up and used that to travel around again. And then eventually passed away in December of 1952. During the Great London Smog that killed 12,000 people.
Oh, blimey! Okay,
just a very adventurous life. Yeah. I mean, just filled. And there's a lot of other stuff that we didn't get into that happened.
When it comes to writing this, Dustin, I mean, couple of things. How do you boil it down? Because otherwise, this book would be this works well on radio. Would be the size of the Encyclopedia Britannica, because it just gets more and more fantastical. So how do you sort of boil this down to a manageable size? And for you, plotting the writing must have been a crossing in itself.
It very well. I mean, it can get very long. My second book that I came up with got a little out of control. It would have been about 500 pages before I started cutting it down. The publisher's like, "Yeah, we need to cut that down a little bit." This one wasn't quite as bad, but as you mentioned before, there's a lot of information out there on Titanic, and this Lightoller, he lived to be almost 79 years old. He was a couple months shy of his 79th birthday when he passed away. But when you think about it, Titanic was about 28 days of his 79-year life. I mean, it kind of came to define him. I mean, his own memoirs was called Titanic and Other Ships. But I didn't want the Titanic portion of the book to overwhelm his story, right? Because it was really a small portion of it. But there's so much information on there about Titanic and stuff. And, you can go down that rabbit hole and just keep adding to the story and stuff like that. So I tried to make it a manageable book, try to hit the highlights and give some context. His own memoirs take him from the age of 13 to 1920 when he leaves the White Star Line. So all the stuff about Dunkirk and some of the other stuff that he did after leaving the White Star Line, isn't in there. So, you're going through, newspaper articles and just different other documentation research, a decent amount of time at the National Archives there at the Q, just kind of researching information and giving the story some context.
Did you get an idea of what the man was like? Was he personable? Was he sort of this gruff sea dog? I mean, we get things in our PSTD and we can explain this away, but did he? I mean, with a life like that, some of the things he's seen. I mean, what was he like personally? Do you think, Dustin?
I mean, I think definitely in his early days, he was a bit of a jokester and stuff like that. I mean, I think he aged out of some of that, but I think he was. A pretty nice guy. I mean, he seems to be well liked by his peers. I don't really get the impression of this gruff old sea dog. I mean, maybe at the end of his life.
Maybe, he had every right to be. I could talk to you about this until probably about next Thursday, but unfortunately, time is beating us. The book is called Unsinkable Lights, Child H. Lightoller's epic tale of hope and survival. Listeners, go to our TRE bookstore, click on the front page, on the front cover, and it'll be winging its way to you. Dustin, if people want to find you online and say nice things to you, obviously, where is the best place to find you? Social media, website, where can people find you?
I do have a website. Dustin Hyland is HYLAND.com. They can reach out to me there, and I have the books available, signed books available. I'm always happy to.
There you go, listeners. Go to his website, get a signed copy by the man himself, and put it proudly next to your model of the Titanic, probably, and find out more about that. The book is called Unsinkable Lights. It's by Dustin D. Hyland. Dustin, it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you today.
Thank you for having me.